Hello, my name is Ryan Anderson. I am an ATP and a CFI for airplane, instrument, and multi-engine aircraft. Today I want to discuss understanding airspace. This is often a difficult subject for many. They do not want to learn it. They do not understand why the rules were out there. They learn it by rote, and as soon as they get through their test, it all goes out of their mind. I would like to try and put pictures in your mind of what this airspace looks like, what the rules are for it, and why the rules are there for. There are many different kinds of airspaces and a lot of different rules to know. This can be very confusing. And then there are all the different rules for the different altitudes, just to add on top of it. So let's start with the least regulated airspace that actually has the most amount of rules, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Class G airspace. So many rules, so little time. What is Class G airspace? Class G airspace is simply uncontrolled airspace, or as I like to call it, out of control airspace. Where do we find it? Well, think of the ground. Everything against the ground, with the exception of certain airports, which we will get to later, is in Class G airspace. Class G airspace extends from the surface of the Earth to 1,200-foot AGL in most areas. In some areas, it is higher and can extend up to 14,500 feet MSL. Let's go ahead and break this airspace down. During the day, the Class G airspace rules state that below 1,200 foot above the surface, regardless of MSL altitude, all you need to maintain VFR rules is to have 1 mile visibility and remain clear of the clouds. Above 1,200 foot AGL and below 10,000 foot MSL, you must have 1 mile visibility and remain 500 foot below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 foot horizontal from any clouds. Above 1,200 foot AGL and above 10,000 foot MSL, you must have 5 miles visibility, remain 1,000 foot above, 1,000 foot below, and 1 mile horizontally from the clouds. No transponder is required in Class G airspace, no ATC communications are required, and radar coverage and communications with ATC are questionable at best. Basically, you are on your own. So what does Class G airspace look like on a map? Well, you're looking at it. With certain exceptions, there are no special symbols depicting this airspace. In most areas, the Class G airspace simply extends from the surface to 1,200 foot AGL. In this area, where you see the magenta vignette that surrounds so many airports, the Class G extends from the surface up to 700 foot AGL. Here is the exception to the rule. Wherever you see a blue vignette, inside this vignette, the Class G extends up to 14,500 foot MSL. Due to advancement in technology such as better radar and GPS navigation, there are very few of these areas left. In non-standard areas where Class G extends higher than 1,200 foot AGL but does not reach 14,500 foot, the airspace is depicted like this and will have a corresponding altitude annotated. So let's see what this looks like in real life and try and figure out why these rules are the way they are. Let's plan a couple of cross countries here. Let's go from Napoleon, North Dakota down to Wishick. All Class G airspace up to 1,200 feet AGL. And let's assume a 400-foot ceiling with a 1 mile visibility. The trip is 17 nautical miles, which makes a 12-minute flight at 90 knots. We're going to fly this in a Cessna 172, and just say we're going to maintain 90 knots. So Napoleon Airport is at 1,985 foot MSL. So 1985 plus the 400-foot ceiling that we have equals 2,385. So let's try and stay 85 feet below the clouds, and we'll just do this trip at 2,300 feet. Wishick is at 2,043 feet. If we stayed at 2,300 feet all the way down, we would only be 267 feet off the ground when we got there. Now the nearest station that reports weather is Linton. Linton is 25 nautical miles away from Napoleon and 29 nautical miles away from Wishick. Most of my flights right now come out of Moorhead, Minnesota. The Moorhead Airport is only 8 miles away from Fargo. I always look at both airports when I'm looking at the weather to brief myself. Quite often I'll see Fargo completely different from Moorhead. Moorhead could be VFR and Fargo could be low IFR. 8 miles can make a lot of difference. So keep this in mind as you try and do this cross country. You never know what you're really going to run into. I don't know about you, but especially in 1 mile visibility, I can't look up into the sky and know exactly where those clouds are. For these purposes, we are going to assume there is no wind. That way we can take off or land on any runway, and our 90 knots is going to hold true no matter what direction we go. So taking off to the southeast in Napoleon, this is more what our flight path is going to look like. And here's what we're going to run into. First, there's this tower that is at 208 feet AGL, or 2,259 feet MSL. It's only 1 mile from Napoleon Airport, and you probably would not have climbed over it by the time you pass it. Next, we see this tower that's at 2,342 feet MSL. Remember what altitude we're going to fly at? We're talking about 2,300 feet. So this tower is already 42 feet above what we propose to fly at, and it is only 2.2 miles from the course. The next tower is all the way up to 2,665 feet and only 1.7 miles from the course. And then there are these high-tension power lines. These lines do not show what altitude they are at, but we all know that they get pretty high, and they are only 0.4 miles from the final into Wishick Airport. And last but not least, 1.3 miles from the airport is this tower that is at 256 feet AGL. Hopefully we are not off course at all, and we will completely avoid it. But with 1 mile visibility and just remaining clear of clouds, I would hate to see you miss the Wishick Airport. At least in this case, we're straight onto the runway. So let's look at another cross country in the same area. This time I'm a farmer from Hazleton, over having coffee with a buddy in Napoleon, and I flew over there to do it. So the weather starts going down, I'm in Napoleon, and I want to get home to Hazleton. Once again, Napoleon's at 1,985 feet. We're going to assume that 400-foot ceiling and 1 mile visibility. 1985 plus 400 is 2385. So we're going to use that 2,300 feet again. Hazleton, on the other hand, is up to 2,015 feet. That only puts us at 285 feet AGL when we get there, if we don't make the descent right away. Once again, Linton is the nearest reporting station for weather. It is only 25 nautical miles away from Napoleon and 16 nautical miles away from Hazleton. So let's take a look at our course. The one thing that is glaring at me right away is this tower right here. It's at 2,382 feet, 82 feet above our final cruising altitude, and we are going to go right over the thing. Or should I say, we're going to go right into the thing. So let's plan on taking off to the northwest. We'll fly out a little bit, get past the road that we see on the north side of Napoleon, fly straight west for a little while, and then head to Hazleton. Once again, our obstacles, we have that tower that's just 1.3 miles from the airport. And if you had decided to take off to the southeast and make a right turn out to go to Hazleton, that thing's going to be right in your path. But we're not doing that now, so let's just keep moving. So the tower we looked at before is roughly a mile away from our course. Again, it is 82 feet above our final cruise altitude. The next thing we have in our way are those high-tension power lines again. 1 mile visibility, are you going to be able to see the wires if you can't see the towers? Finally, just past Hazleton, there's another tower at 2,375 feet. Well, you should have been making your descent then, but again, do you know exactly where you are at with 1 mile visibility? Now let's take a quick look at Hazleton Airport. The symbol shows us that there is a grass strip there. It does not have a lighted runway. There is no rotating beacon, and runway 1735 is the single sod runway on the field. You are coming at that runway at a 90-degree angle, and it is going to be very difficult to spot, even for an experienced pilot. You better make certain that you are not landing on some farmer's field and that you are actually at an airport. Many different surprises can ensue. What I'm getting at with all of this is what is legal is not necessarily prudent. 1 mile and clear of clouds. I keep repeating that so you remember it. And remember, this is only in the daytime. But 1 mile and clear of clouds. Traveling at 90 knots, how long does it take you to fly 1 mile? It's only about 40 seconds. So when something comes into view, you only have 40 seconds to see and avoid it if you saw it at a mile. Things can happen very quickly, and unless you are experienced and you know the territory very well so you can use ground references in order to navigate, I wouldn't even consider this kind of a trip. So let's do one more cross country here. Let's assume you are now an instrument-rated pilot. You live in Cullum, North Dakota, but they have no instrument approach. Edgeley is not far away, so you think, okay, I'm just going to shoot an approach into Edgeley, and then I'll take a left turn, head over to Cullum, and everything will be great, fine, and dandy, and I'm home. Well, again, Edgeley does not report weather. I think one of the nearest stations is going to be Jamestown, which is 30 miles north, and there you have not only the weather, but you have a TAF. Again, weather can be completely different in Edgeley than what it is in Jamestown. So we plan on coming in, shooting the approach, taking a left turn. Let's assume a 500-foot ceiling and 1 mile visibility, and we're home. Edgeley's at 1,604 feet, so 1,604 plus 500 is 2,104. In theory, if we fly at 2,100 feet, we will be 4 feet below the clouds. So let's plan on that. Cullum is at 1,959 feet. At 2,100 feet MSL, that puts us at 141 feet over the Cullum Airport. Pretty darn low. With this flight plan, here's what I'm seeing wrong. This goofy-looking dashed blue line with a single windmill in it denotes a wind farm. Now, that single windmill can be very deceptive because there are many towers out there, the tallest one being 2,347 feet. They're white, they're going to be obscured by the weather, and it is not a good option to try and go through this over 200 feet lower than the tallest tower. And then there's this radio tower that's at 2,466 feet, or 500-foot AGL. This is not a good option at all. So let's try and change what we're going to do. Again, I'm a farmer in this area. I know it very, very well. I know all the landmarks. I'm going to shoot that approach into Edgeley. I'm going to get to the road that goes on the north side of Edgeley, and it passes to the north of the windmill farm. Then I'm going to wrap around the T in the road, hang a left, straight into runway 12 into Cullum Airport. It has lighting. I should be able to see it. I know what it looks like. Yip-de-doo. Everything I have said here is perfectly legal, but not necessarily smart. Notice that magenta vignette around Edgeley again. Remember what that tells us, that Class G airspace only goes to 700 feet. Everything above that is going to be Class E. But because of the weather that we have, we'll stay below that 700-foot AGL anyhow. So let's review Class G airspace daytime rules. Below 1,200 feet AGL at any altitude, you are required to maintain 1 mile visibility and clear of clouds. Above 1,200 feet AGL, below 10,000 MSL, you are required to maintain 1 mile visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 foot below, and 2,000 foot horizontal from the clouds. And then above 1,200 feet AGL and above 10,000 feet MSL, that requires 5 miles visibility, 1,000 foot above, 1,000 foot below, and 1 mile horizontal from the clouds. No transponder is required, no communications with ATC are required, radar coverage and communications are questionable at best. Now let's take a quick look at mountainous terrain. We should all know what that looks like on a map. Just for argument's sake, let's say I just had my 172 worked on at the maintenance shop at Jackson Hole. Now I need to get home to Driggs Reed Memorial. Let's just say that there is 5 miles visibility with a 4,000 foot ceiling. That is sufficient to get me out of the Class D airspace at Jackson Hole. But even if you can avoid all the clouds, look at some of those peaks in the way. 11,938 feet, 10,966 feet, and 9,240 feet. Can anybody say mountain obscuration? Say, what's a mountain goat doing way up here in a cloud bank? Below 10,000 feet and above 1,200 foot AGL, that 1 mile and clear of clouds still pertains. I personally would not want to be anywhere near those peaks with less than clear in a million. Here's what Class G airspace changes to at night. All of that airspace we talked about before goes to a requirement for 3 miles visibility with 1,000 foot above, 500 foot below, and 2,000 foot horizontal distance from the clouds. Now keep those numbers in mind, 152, because we are going to be seeing a lot more of the same. Class E airspace for the most part is everything above Class G airspace. That same 1,200 foot AGL down to 700 foot AGL inside the magenta vignette, and in some airport areas all the way down to the surface. It has upper limits all the way up to Class A airspace over 17,990 feet MSL. No transponder is required under 10,000 feet. No ATC communications are required while VFR, and no VFR clearance is required. It is controlled airspace and it is everywhere. So when you think about Class E airspace, think everywhere. What does Class E airspace look like on a map? Just like Class G. The surface to 1200 foot AGL is Class G, and everything above is going to be Class E up to the Class A. Where you see that magenta vignette, Class G extends up from the surface to 700 feet, and everything above that is Class E. Anywhere you see that magenta dashed line, the Class E goes all the way to the surface. And why is that? Well, the rules for Part 135 and 121 operations state that they are not allowed to operate in uncontrolled or Class G airspace. So you have airports like Devil's Lake that keeps the Class E all the way down to the surface. Another advantage is that no little 172 can be flying around in this area below radar coverage, without a transponder, and with 1 mile visibility and remaining clear of clouds. The last thing you need to see when flying a SkyWest CRJ shooting an ILS approach into Devil's Lake is an airplane in your path as soon as you pop out of the clouds. No time to see and avoid. You have to do an immediate go-around, shoot the approach again, and hope to God he is not still there when you pop out again. You are not allowed to enter controlled airspace in instrument meteorological conditions, or IMC, without an instrument clearance from ATC. This means that you must maintain the 3152 all the way to the surface in these airports. With an IFR clearance, that airspace is protected for one airplane to be in the vicinity and only one. ATC will separate all other IFR traffic, and no VFR traffic will surprise you when you transition from IMC to VMC, or visual meteorological conditions. In 3D, this is what it looks like. Class E airspace on top, Class G underneath. So let's look at the cloud clearance and visibility requirements for Class E airspace, and let's discuss why it is the way it is. Remember that below 10,000 feet, you are restricted to an airspeed of 250 knots. You have a visibility requirement of 3 miles with 1,000 foot above, 500 foot below, and 2,000 foot horizontal from the clouds, or the 3152, just like we were seeing earlier and just like I told you to remember. But what's it there for? All of this air traffic coming out of Class E airspace, and I'm using the airlines as an example because those are the fast guys. They're the ones who are going to get in your way, or you are going to get into their way. These guys are coming off of the surface. They're coming off of an airport somewhere. They're climbing out. They have a 250 knot speed restriction, but they're climbing out at 3,000 foot a minute. So this guy right here, he's doing 200 knots. He's climbing out at 3,000 foot a minute. On top of the clouds as he climbs, 3,000 foot a minute only gives you 20 seconds to see and avoid that traffic when you are required to stay away from that cloud by 1,000 feet. He's also moving fast horizontally, so they're asking for 2,000 feet horizontally so that you can stay away from him and give yourself at least 20 seconds to see and avoid. Now this guy is coming out of the flight levels. He's coming below 10,000 feet MSL. He's having to slow to 250 knots, and he has typically slowed his descent rate to 1,500 foot a minute. At 1,500 foot a minute, with a 500 foot separation below the clouds, again gives you about 20 seconds to see and avoid this guy, provided you're not head on. And then there's this guy who's out there, he's doing 250 knots. They usually do not restrict their airspeed until they are very close to an airport. At 250 knots, 2,000 feet, you're lucky to have 20 seconds again to see and avoid. You don't always know what's out there. This 172 over here could be non-transponder, radar service could be limited, and they just don't even know that he's there. He's not talking to anybody, and with that jet coming out of the clouds, we're just trying to see each other and avoid it. That's where the most important thing comes in. Above 10,000 feet, things change a little bit. Here you are required to have 5 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and 1 mile horizontal from clouds. This guy coming off the surface is still climbing up to the flight levels. He's still doing 3,000 foot a minute, and he's probably doing 250 knots now. The guy coming down, he's cruising. He is moving like a banshee. He's probably doing Mach 0.78, Mach 0.79. He's doing 3,000 foot a minute down. So now they're requiring us to have another 1,000 feet at the bottom of the clouds as well as at the top for that 3,000 foot a minute. And because he's moving so fast, They're trying to keep you 1 mile away from the clouds horizontally. And this other guy, he's out there easily doing, again, Mach 0.77, 0.78, 500 knots, let's call it. So we're going to give him that wide berth of that same 1 mile away for these guys who are out tooling around close to the clouds. More than likely, you will have radar coverage and you will have ATC communication here. Plus, a Mode C transponder is required above 10,000 feet, so you should be seen by any radar. But that does not mean when they talk to this 767 here that he is going to be VFR and be able to see you. So we need that separation. Class A airspace is IFR only, and ATC clearance is required. There are no clearance distances from clouds and there is no visibility requirements because you have to be on an IFR flight plan. Class A airspace starts at 18,000 feet MSL, goes up to flight level 600. And remember, in Class A, you have to have your altimeter set to 2992. All altitudes in the Class A airspace are considered flight levels, i.e. flight level 600 is essentially 60,000 feet if the surface altimeter was that standard 2992. So why 18,000 feet MSL if everything is supposed to be flight levels in Class A airspace? Well, remember this altimeter setting, 2992. Let's make an assumption that the surface altimeter in this area is 2962. That leaves you 300 feet low. Changing the altimeter at 18,000 feet to 2992 would put you 300 feet higher than you are, so you would no longer be at flight level 180, but at flight level 183, which is not an authorized altitude. Leaving your altimeter at 2992 and descending to 180 or descending to 18,000 feet would actually put you 300 feet lower than 18,000 feet, so you're no longer in Class A airspace. What we learned from this is flight level 180 no longer exists when the altimeter is less than 2992. If the altimeter goes less than 2892, which is very low, flight level 190 would not exist. The only other thing you need to remember is the altitude change in Class A airspace. At flight level 240, DME is required on board your aircraft. So what's above Class A airspace? It only goes to 60,000 feet, right? Well, now you're back to Class E airspace. Remember, it's everywhere. What flies up in Class E airspace? Well, this guy used to a lot. The U-2 did. Basically, some select military aircraft and spacecraft at this point. So to this point, we have looked at 3 different airspaces. Class G, uncontrolled. Class E, kind of a general controlled airspace that you don't need to talk to anybody in. And Class A, which is IFR only. Now let's start getting into the airspaces that surround control towers. There are 3 of those also, Class B, Class C, and Class D. Splitting these 2 varieties of airspace up should help you to keep this stuff from being overwhelming. Let's look at Class D first. The airport right here in Fargo is a Class D airport. Class D airspace extends from the surface to 2,500 foot AGL, and it has a radius of 5 nautical miles from the geographical center of the airport. Because of that, this depiction is actually out of perspective, but we'll look at that in a second. So what's required for cloud clearance and visibility? Class D airspace, we're right back to that 3 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 foot below, and 2,000 foot horizontal, for the exact same reasons we just discussed. There's a speed limit of 200 knots in Class D, but still with the jets coming and going, all the different traffic, you need that cloud clearance. Remember dialogue for Class D. In Class D airspace, you are required to start a dialogue with ATC. In other words, you have to have established 2-way radio communications. You do not need a clearance into Class D, but you need to make a radio call that sounds something like Fargo Tower, Archer 8093 Golf, inbound landing runway 36. Their response, if they even say 8093 Golf, stand by. Once you hear them repeat your tail number, you have officially established 2-way radio communications. Now, what Class D airspace really looks like is more like this. Very flat and very wide. If you consider that a statute mile is 5,280 feet, the 10 statute mile diameter is 52,800 feet versus the 2,500 foot off the surface. I hope this gives you a better picture for the next time you come into Class D. This is what it looks like on a map. This blue dashed circle is Class D airspace from the surface up to that 2,500-foot AGL. The little box with the 34 in it shows how high in MSL the thing goes. So you know that at 3,400 feet MSL, that is where the top of the Class D airspace ends. Remember, for Class D, ATC communications are required. However, no transponder or Mode C is required. So let's get into Class C. Class C has that outer area of 20 nautical miles, that outer circle that goes to a 10 nautical mile radius that extends from 1,200 feet AGL up to 4,000 feet AGL. Then the surface area looks a lot like the Class D airspace, but it is shorter. It has a 5 nautical mile radius from the geographical center of the airport and extends up to 1,200 feet AGL. Once again, your cloud clearances and visibility requirements are 3 miles visibility and 152. The same as we've been looking at D and E and G at night, and it's for those same reasons of seeing and avoiding separation from other aircraft. When you think of Class C, think Mode C. A Mode C transponder is required inside the Class C airspace and above it. On a map, this is what it looks like, a solid magenta line. You will always see those two lines, the 10 nautical mile ring and the 5 nautical mile ring. Outside that area, look at the magenta vignette. Class G airspace only goes to 700 feet. Everything else is Class E. Just like Class D, ATC communications are required, and now a Mode C transponder is required in and above the Class C airspace. Notice the little box that says Contact Billings Approach within 20 nautical miles on these frequencies. They need to hear from you. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about special VFR. What does that do for me? Well, in daylight hours and in nighttime hours, if you have an instrument rating, with a special VFR, you may operate in Class D and E airspace, as well as some Class C and B, with 1 mile visibility and remaining clear of clouds. You must have ATC clearance to do this, and you must have an instrument rating in order to get a special VFR if operating at night. No special VFR will be issued unless the airport is IFR with a ceiling below 1,000 feet and or visibility less than 3 miles. This is a rule that actually kind of shocked me one day. I was doing a demonstration flight with a 182, knew the ceiling was getting low, and I just wanted to do a couple of turns around the pattern to show this guy how the airplane flew. Well, we had like 10 miles visibility and a 1,000-foot ceiling. I did not want to run around 500 foot below those clouds because it was going to only put me 500 feet above the surface. I asked for a special VFR and they would not give it to me because the field was not IFR yet. You learn something new every day. Now let's take a look at Class B airspace. As it says, this is a 3D depiction of standard Class B. It's what everybody talks about, the upside-down wedding cake. Many layers. To get into Class B airspace, you are required to have a clearance from ATC. If you are VFR, you need to hear those words, cleared into Class B airspace. When you are IFR, they will give you a heading and an altitude, and if it puts you in the Class B, that is your clearance. Around any Class B airport, there will be a Mode C veil. That veil will typically have a 30 nautical mile radius and extend all the way from the surface up. Your visibility and cloud clearance requirements are simply 3 miles visibility and remain clear of clouds. Remember, Class B is big, it's busy, and it's blue. Let's quickly take a look at the Class B airspace around the Minneapolis airport. Notice it's very close to that upside-down wedding cake, but not quite. It has a couple of different sections with some different altitudes. There are even a couple of holes in the thing. Here, for instance, you see the Class B doesn't exist all the way to the surface. The reasoning for this is, this area, you have ultralight activity. This area at Forest Lake, you have skydiving. This area down to the south, you have glider operations. In Class B airspace, you will always have a number of different arrivals and departures for IFR traffic in and out of the different airports around that area. Typically, these anomalies in that upside-down wedding cake are trying to make way for the arrivals and the departures. These are the arrivals into Minneapolis. Here's what they look like on the map. Here are the departures and what they look like on the map. You see, they're trying to keep the arrivals and departures separate as well as keep them out of these areas. What you have to remember is don't call ATC 30 miles out and expect a clearance. When you're coming up on Class B airspace and want to get into it, give them at least 40 nautical miles so they have time to respond. Remember, they're very busy and they want to make certain that they get you taken care of. Even if you are flying underneath Class B airspace, it is always a good idea to be talking to approach. They're more than happy to accommodate you to help them separate the IFR and the VFR traffic. So let's take a quick look at the New York Class B airspace. 3 major airports inside this airspace. A perfect example of how things can really change from that upside-down wedding cake theory. Here we have LaGuardia, then JFK, and Newark in New Jersey. All Class B airports, all with their own little airspaces, all put together in Class B. Remember this white line, what it means? That is showing that there is a TAC chart or a terminal area chart available for this area. Here is a good 3D depiction of that New York airspace. Notice all those little VFR routes underneath. Remember, you are required to maintain 3 miles visibility and stay clear of clouds in Class B. Inside the Class B, you still have that 250 knot airspeed restriction, but in the underlying airspace of the Class B, you are restricted to 200 knots. An even more confusing Class B area, many different altitudes and shapes, is San Francisco. San Francisco has Oakland and SJC that are both Class C, SQL, PAO, and Moffett that are all Class D, all intertwined underneath the airspace in that Class B. So just remember, Class B is not all as simple as an upside-down wedding cake. And frankly, besides your TAC chart, nothing can help you navigate the Class B airspace better than talking to air traffic control, having them help you through it, and using a GPS that will tell you exactly where you are inside that Class B, or underlying it for that matter. All right, so let's keep this simple. Let's break down all of these different rules that we're talking about. We already broke down the different airspaces, but let's review that. There are only a few things you ever really need to remember about airspace. Airspace outside of an airport with an operating control tower is either going to be Class G, or uncontrolled airspace, Class E, or an open controlled airspace, if you will, or Class A, which is IFR only. Remember, when a control tower closes, as it often does in many Class D airports, that Class D becomes Class E. So that's only 3 airspaces to remember outside of an airport with a control tower. Now, the airports with an operating tower are going to be Class D, Class C, and Class B. There are only 3 different visibility requirements, either 1 mile, 3 miles, or 5 miles, as well as 3 different cloud clearances. You're either going to be clear of clouds, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 foot horizontal, or you're going to be 1,000 foot above, 1,000 foot below, and 1 mile horizontally. Again, Class A airspace is IFR only, so it has no restrictions for visibility and cloud clearances. Class B airspace requires 3 miles visibility and to remain clear of the clouds. Class G airspace, on a more simple term, during the daytime, below 1,200 feet AGL at any altitude, you are required 1 mile visibility and clear of clouds, and above 1,200 feet AGL and below 10,000 feet MSL, you are required 1 mile visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 below, and 2,000 foot horizontal. Again, here are all those rules, but let's break it down. Class G airspace during the daytime, you're either 1 statute mile or clear of clouds, or you're 1 statute mile and 1,000 feet, 500 feet, and 2,000 feet. These areas always have just 1 mile visibility as a minimum. You are either going to be clear of clouds, or 1,000 above, 500 below, and 2,000 foot horizontal. Anything different from what we just discussed is going to be the same as Class E airspace. All airspace above 10,000 feet MSL, with the exception of that Class G that is below 1,200 feet AGL, requires 5 miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 foot below, and 1 mile horizontal. All other airspace below 10,000 feet MSL requires 3 miles visibility in that same 152. 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 horizontal. Remember, a Mode C transponder is required anywhere above 10,000 feet except in Class G airspace. It will also be required in and above Class C airspace and inside the Mode C veil from the surface up surrounding the Class B airspace. On January 1st, 2020, the FAA mandated adsb out for certain airspaces. What is adsb? adsb is Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast Equipment. So what does that mean? Automatic means it requires no pilot input or external interrogation like a transponder does. Dependent means that it depends on accurate position and velocity data from the aircraft's navigation system, such as GPS. Surveillance provides aircraft position, altitude, velocity, and other surveillance data to facilities that require the information. Broadcast, meaning the information is continually broadcast for monitoring by appropriately equipped ground stations or aircraft. This system is based on reception and transmissions from both satellites and ground-based transmitters/receivers. So what does this adsb do? Well, it provides flight identification such as tail number or flight number, aircraft position, altitude, climb or descent rate, speed, and a few other items. It provides excellent traffic identification and avoidance. I mentioned that adsb out is required. What is out versus in? Simply put, the out sends out the program signal from your aircraft to both satellites and ground-based installations, and the in receives the signal from that system showing you other aircraft. adsb will also transmit weather and other pertinent items for your flight. The hardware required for adsb varies quite a bit. Most adsb receivers/transmitters are in new transponders. The most common is an adsb-capable transponder. There are also simple internal setups or even nav light replacements that has adsb in it. And then there are the standalone items such as the Stratus. This particular unit is an excellent tool for adsb in and out and provides several other services such as a GPS, but it does not fulfill the requirements as an official adsb out. This particular unit transmits to a tablet or smartphone, which gives you a moving map with traffic and many other incredible services, but those items are for another lesson. One major advantage is the adsb in. Even if your main aircraft equipment is only adsb out, this is a wonderful solution to provide you with an adsb in so you can keep track of the traffic around you. adsb out is now required in certain areas. Keeping it simple, anywhere you need Mode C, adsb out is required. In other words, in Class B and C areas and above 10,000 feet. One of the things you really want to keep in mind, bases are never even and weather moves. You never know what you're going to run into until you're there. Keep things safe. Keep things smart. Set your own personal minimums. Remember why the rules are the way they are. It's to keep you separated from objects on the ground and to keep you separated from other traffic, whether it be IFR or VFR. The last thing you need is to be screwing around right next to the clouds and have somebody else on the other side doing the same thing, and you come around that corner and bam, you're running into another airplane. One other thing to consider, I keep asking my avionics guy for that cloud rangefinder to set in the airplane so I know exactly what my distance is from it. Ironically, he keeps telling me it doesn't exist yet. So your judgment of what is 1,000 feet away or 2,000 feet away or a mile away varies from my judgment. It's simply a guess. There is no instrumentation in that aircraft that tells us exactly where those clouds are. Also keep in mind that if you're flying in a mile visibility, a cloud that's up ahead may be obscured. Now I want to finish this class by reading to you an accident report from the NTSB. On October 2nd, 2016, about 11:57 Alaska Daylight Time, Raven Connect Flight 3153, a turbine-powered Cessna 208B Grand Caravan airplane, tail number November 208 Sierra Delta, collided with steep mountainous terrain about 10 nautical miles northwest of Togiak Airport in Togiak, Alaska. The 2 commercial pilots and the passenger were killed, and the airplane was destroyed. The scheduled commuter flight was operating under visual flight rules by Hageland Aviation Services in Anchorage, Alaska, under the provisions of FAR Part 135. The NTSB's investigation determined that instrument meteorological conditions, or IMC, were likely in the vicinity of the accident site at the time of the accident. The flight departed Quintagak at 11:33 and was en route to Togiak. Now, throughout the entire probable cause section, which is actually very short, the salient point is the very first line. The NTSB determines that the probable cause of this accident was the flight crew's decision to continue the visual flight rules into deteriorating visibility and their failure to perform an immediate escape maneuver after entry into instrument meteorological conditions, which resulted in a controlled flight into terrain. They go on to do what they always do and blame the company, yada, 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 for insufficient training. But again, the salient point is here, even 2 commercial instrument-rated pilots flying in the same airplane were killed along with the passenger because they were flying VFR in low VFR conditions. The conditions deteriorated, they ended up IMC, and then they ended up into the side of a mountain. What is legal is not always prudent. Keep that in mind. Fly safe, set higher margins for yourself, but know what these rules are and why they are there. My YouTube channel is Ryan Anderson 3620. Please subscribe to my channel and you will receive notices of new videos that come in.